Many of you may not know his name, but many of you will know what Weinstein is a professor of biology at Evergreen State College. So let me say at the outset, sir, that you and I are politically different, but I admire you for what I always tell my listeners is the rarest of all the good traits, and that is courage. And in my view, you exhibited courage at your college. And
Thanks.
You're welcome. And let me just remind people at Evergreen State, and you fill in the details here because you'll know them much better than I. There was a white day of absence called for. So is that correct? Is that the genesis of what happened?
Well, the story is a good deal more complicated than your listeners are liable to be interested in. But when I was confronted at my classroom, it was about my objection to the reversal of what has been a campus tradition called Day of Absence, in which usually students of color have absented themselves from the campus, but this year they called for white students, staff, and faculty to leave the campus, which I regarded as oppressive, and I said so in an email to my faculty and staff colleagues, and it caused quite a stir over email, and then the email was broadcast by our campus paper so that students saw it, and they 50 or so students that I did not know came and disrupted my class on May 23rd, demanding my resignation.
We have an audio of the confrontation. Okay, so here's just a bit of the audio, and I'm sure we played it at the time, but go ahead.
Debate, wait a second. No, it is. Debate means you are trying to win. Dialectic means you are using disagreement to discover what is true. I am not interested in debate. I am interested only in dialectic, which does mean I listen to you and you listen to me.
We don't care what terms you want to speak on. This is not about you.
I'm talking all about him.
Okay, all right. It's too difficult for me to hear, so we'll leave it for now. People got an idea. We played it at the time. Okay, it went national and so on. Before we continue, here is something I promised myself I would ask you. I know, for example, I saw you on Fox News, and you're obviously on a conservative show right now on talk radio, a national radio show. So I am curious, did the liberal media give you as much attention?
No, they actually, in large measure, have not covered the story yet. And when they've done so, they've largely done so in a trivial form. And this is one of my greatest concerns about this story, is that there's actually a lot to be understood about why this took place, what it means about what's taking place in the academy more broadly. But this story leans in a direction that the right is more comfortable talking about it, and so in some ways it's been utilized to validate a story on the right that is not entirely correct, but because it fits that narrative, it's been used that way, and it's been ignored on the left because it's a very uncomfortable narrative from the point of view of traditional left-leaning understanding of the world. And the result is that I think we have not collectively understood what the implications are, and the implications are deep. Evergreen is really a cautionary tale for the rest of the academy, and as the academy fails in light of challenges like this one, it puts us all in jeopardy.
Right. So my question then is, in what way do you believe that the right-wing narrative is not valid? We believe, as a member of the right, if you will, and one who attended Ivy League graduate schools and who taught college, that the colleges have become the most intellectually closed institutions in the United States of America. What happened at Evergreen surprised not a single conservative in this country. And so why is our narrative invalid?
Well, your narrative isn't entirely invalid.
Why is it at all invalid?
Well, so let's take the Evergreen case. What you can't see in that clip that you played is that there was an overt challenge by one part of the college against another part. So the sciences were more or less backed against the wall by social sciences and humanities. And the result of that is that the entire academy looks foolish, like it is telling fairy tales, when in fact a good many of us were busy doing the hard work of figuring out what's true and how to interpret it. And we were confronted by this force. So at some level, this is a tension within the academy between two forces rather than evidence that the academy is simply out of its mind.
Good. I subscribe 100% to your thesis. If I were more precise, and I often am, my listeners know this, I can't fool my listeners, I could fool you, but I can't fool them. I often state, outside of the natural sciences and mathematics, the university has been taken over by left-wing ideologues. You teach biology. It is very hard to teach mitochondria from a left-wing point of view. We on the right totally understand that. So if you and I are on the same page that the so-called social sciences have been corrupted overwhelmingly on our campuses, we have no difference of opinion whatsoever.
Well, I want to correct that slightly. It happens that teaching about mitochondria is not my bag. So I teach evolutionary biology, and evolutionary biology, if one understands it properly, has very important implications for human beings.
Correct. I agree with you. So, and therefore?
Well, the content of what I and my wife, who is also an evolutionary biologist, what we teach does address many of the questions that have been the focus of the social sciences. But our toolkit, the things that we bring to bear to understand those questions, are a scientific toolkit, which I must say I think is the ideal toolkit to utilize. It's sort of a guns, germs, and steel approach to things like human history. So anyway, it's not as if we are outside of the concerns of the humanities and social sciences by virtue of the fact that we are studying.
No, your specific concern has tremendous ramifications. I mean, obviously, were we designed blindly or designed by a designer, to put it in its most fundamental form? And it's something we have dealt with on this program. But nevertheless, you teach in the Department of Biology. You don't teach in the Department of Sociology or Gender Studies. So are we in a large sense in agreement that there has been an intellectual and moral corruption, with understanding that there are always individually wonderful exceptions, but that there has been this corruption in the so-called social sciences at our universities?
Yes, and it's been going on for decades.
Okay, so I just want to underscore this for my listeners. I have here a gentleman. Is it fair to say that you're on the left?
Me? Absolutely.
Okay, right. So a gentleman from the left who teaches at a university, teaches biology, and who believes that there is a massive gulf between the sciences, the natural sciences, and the social sciences departments in terms of, I'll put it in these terms, and do you assent, in terms even of search for truth?
Absolutely. I mean, there isn't even agreement on what truth means.
Okay.
There's no basis for discussion.
All right. Well, you okay, we'll continue. Folks, I just want you to understand this man is a man of the left, teaches evolutionary biology, and we are in apparently close to 100% agreement as to what has happened to our universities. All right, just for the record. We'll be back in a moment with Professor Bret Weinstein. I'm speaking with Professor Bret Weinstein, Professor of Biology at Evergreen State College, who has become quite well known. And I'm going to ask you about that, too, because I'm sure this is not exactly how you anticipated the trajectory of your life.
Definitely not.
Yes, I could tell, believe me. I watched you, believe me. And many of us have, and we actually found the videos actually scary. So let's go to the events themselves when you were screamed at and cursed at by students. Did this shock you?
Well, at first it caught me so off guard that it's a little hard to, things go into slow motion as something that dramatic that you don't anticipate unfolds. So, I think just at a literal level, yes, I was absolutely shocked when it first occurred. And then it seemed to capture my life and sweep it into a whirlwind that went on for weeks unabated. So I guess the answer to your question is just simply yes. I was
All right,
shocked.
Let me restate for my listeners just very briefly. Professor Weinstein refused to take the call, to listen to the call of a white day of absence from Evergreen State. And by the way, your refusal again, it was on the grounds that it was racist. What were your moral grounds for not taking part in the day of absence of whites?
It seemed to me that this is literally what I said, is that there is a tremendous difference between a population deciding to absent itself in order to emphasize their important and underappreciated role, and a population deciding to absent another population. I just don't think that's ever appropriate. And so although it was technically voluntary that we could leave if we felt like it, there was the strong implication that were we allied with oppressed people, that we folks who are understood to be white would leave campus, and that just had a terrible ring. I really don't think.
Were you the only professor to refuse?
Well, I was the only professor to refuse vocally. I cannot say what people did, but I can say nobody else stood up and objected.
Okay, I'm going to go back to that in a moment, but I just want to get the facts straight in my mind. Did this day actually take place?
Oh, yes. The day took place.
And you stayed at the campus?
Well, I did not have class that day, but I did go onto campus.
Were you the only white professor there?
Oh, no, I was not the only white professor there. I ran into at least one other white professor, and I know that a couple others were there too. So I cannot speak to what people did in anything other than an anecdotal way.
But in an anecdotal way, you saw about a total of less than a half dozen white professors that day?
Well, I certainly didn't tour the campus looking for people and categorizing them by race, but in going to my office and meeting with a student, I ran into...
All right, so is it fair to say the overwhelming majority of white professors did leave the campus as they were told to?
I really have no idea.
But if you had to bet your house, what would you bet?
I honestly couldn't tell you. I think this is in some sense missing...
I'll tell you this. I would bet my house, and I wasn't even there, that the vast majority of your colleagues were wimps.
Well, I mean, clearly the fact that nobody else stood up and pointed out that segregation was regressive, and, I mean, the fact that apparently illegal things took place on the day of absence that had nothing to do with it being voluntary. In other words, a professor who did not understand the structure of the day, who took her students to the opening ceremony, which she was mixed race, and then she believed that white folks were to leave campus later in the day. She was turned away. So this was on a state campus. She was turned away from a public building on the basis that she was unwelcome because of her white skin. That all has a very particular character to it. And so the fact that the event was voluntary is true, but the fact that there was an expectation that those who were allied would abide by this rule and stay away from campus was clear, and it was made clear by what happened to that professor I just mentioned.
Right. So you were pretty much a lonely man of faith.
Well, I was a man of conviction.
You're right. You were a lonely man of conviction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's why I introduced you as saying you have the rarest of the good traits, courage. So how has this played out since then? Are you branded in some sense at your college?
Am I branded? Yeah, I mean, I would say I am branded, but I would say also that it's very misleading. If you look at what is said publicly on my campus, there are a couple of voices that have spoken out in support, and then there are a great many people who are supportive of my position and what I've done who say so privately, but are apparently afraid to say so publicly because they know they will be branded as racist or disloyal or something. So there is this sense of having been branded, but really a lot of it has to do with the fact that those who do the branding feel emboldened and are vocal. And
yes, they have every reason to feel emboldened. They're supported by the college, by its president, as you pointed out at the time. So my final question to you is, even though I think I know the answer, but I still want to hear how you phrase it. Has this caused any soul-searching with regard to your commitment to left-wing ideology?
Well, that's a great question. I am not a left-wing ideologue. I have arrived at left values because I believe they are the natural conclusion of what I've come to understand about where we are in the world. But I'm not committed to being a progressive. What I would say is that I'm a progressive because I believe we live in a situation that is not viable long term, and we must have progress in order to survive. I would love to live in a world that was so highly functional that I could be conservative and that I could resist.
Well, that's a great summary, because I think we live in that world called the United States. Sir, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. We'll be back.